Glad everybody could make it. Thank you to the folks at UX Akron for having me on tonight. As you folks know, I absolutely love to share. I love the discipline, and I love helping to vault everybody forward. That's the bottom line. That is my thing. And so tonight, I'm going to be talking to you about the topic, as mentioned, overcoming the whirlwinds of UX misinformation, and they are, excuse me, they are indeed that. They are whirlwinds. But let's jump straight into it here. A little bit about me, though, to get started, just building on what Melanie was talking about earlier. 26 plus years, including my website that I designed back in 95, building on that, deciding to shift, make a big pivot in my career and do UX related. Of course, we didn't call it UX then, but UX related things going forward. Made that decision to go full time back in 2005. So 10 years afterwards, I did that. So 26 years now. So excited, happy about that. I've got a master's from Syracuse, UX related master's from Syracuse, UX related master's from Kent State, where one of the places where I teach, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. Always got to share my beautiful wife, Angela, who's there. We love cats. We have 4. I love photography, award-winning photographer. If you ever want to talk about photography, just let me know, and we can probably talk for a long time about that as well. I love bicycling. I am a member of the 100 pounds club. I lost 100 pounds, and 67 of it was due to bicycling, so I love my bicycling. And I am a former PBA member. And for those who don't know what that is, that's Professional Bowlers Association. That was actually a screenshot from or a picture of my first sanctioned 300 that I threw there just to help illustrate the bowling. I think I'm going to put a different one in there to show me with a bowling ball. I speak all over the world. My footprint's pretty large, hence the World Usability Day logo that you see there. It's actually the first year I'm not speaking at World Usability Day for the first time in about 5 years, but look forward to hearing what other people have to bring to the table. But yeah, all over the world, my footprint is there, and it's all about just taking the discipline forward. That's it. It's not about celebrity status. It's not about being known. It's not about being heard. Just whatever we can do to help vault the discipline forward. That's my focus. Just a quick snapshot of my professional footprint, different companies, and there's a lot more than this, but just like to share that from time to time. And currently, as mentioned, I teach at Kent State, one of the adjuncts there. I teach at Lawrence Tech here in Southfield, Michigan, where I reside. I just joined the faculty at Harrisburg University, a STEM-focused school in Pennsylvania, and I'm about to become a professor at Michigan State University. There's a couple more on the horizon as well. So excited about that because I love helping the students. To get into this topic tonight, I want to do a parallel. And the parallel that I want to start off the talk with is using that of the gold rush. I know this is one of those old style sketches. I'm sure you've seen things like this before. Back in roughly 1849, 1850, people started hearing about gold and everybody wanted to run out west. Everybody was excited. And when I started preparing for this talk and the gold rush came to mind, and I saw a lot of interesting parallels. And I think it's something that was worth building on to help get the point across today. So folks heard about the potential with regard to the gold. They perceived that it was really, really easy to succeed, to find gold. And then people began flocking to wherever the word was that gold could be found. Just nice and simple. Just keep those in mind. Some people succeeded, as we know. Some people thought they succeeded. And I think it's worth noting, and this is where one of the big metaphors or parallels comes into play, is that a lot of people who went out west to find gold ended up coming across what the technical term is pyrite, but it's known as fool's gold. It looks like gold. That's a picture of pyrite that you see here. It looks like gold. Turned out that there's actually traces of gold in it, and we'll touch on that a little bit later because that's an important parallel, a metaphorical element to that as well. But they spent a lot of money. They put forth a lot of effort and a lot of them just came back with fool's gold. Not a happy day for those folks. Now, keeping that in mind, let's go through a brief UX history lesson that I like to share. Back in roughly 93, that's when the phrase user experience sort of entered into the public eye to some extent, where Don Norman was working for Apple, and he was the first person ever, according to the history that we know of, the first person to ever have the title user experience, or the phrase user experience, I should say, in their job title. Again, he was working for Apple. Ironically, just a little tidbit that I personally find humorous and entertaining. He was not working on anything digital. He was working on hardware-oriented devices. That's like pointing that out. I find that funny, I guess, in somewhat of a nerdy kind of way. But things started to shift after that. Not too long after that, America Online, most famously known for being the company that led the charge to people going on the internet. The internet comes along. Everybody's rushing to get online. So between 93 and 98, 99, there's this massive rush of individuals getting online, companies getting online. We get into the dot-com bust in the late 90s, early 2000s, things of that nature. Digitas, LBI, the different agencies around that same time, about the time that we actually started coming out of the dot-com bust, actually, that's where a lot of the UX jobs, for the most part, they resided in that creative agency arena. There were some corporate jobs, yes, and everybody was back then was either an information architect, an interaction designer for the most part, and a human-computer interaction person. So everything revolved around that. We're still not using the acronym UX. It's not even popular yet. But the point here is that most of what was going on in the UX world was happening in creative spaces. A few years later, there we go. Thank you. A few years later, when there was some research that was done by NASA and by IBM, where they, based on the research that they conducted, it was basically about ROI. That for every dollar you invested in UX, again, still coining the acronym, but some of the research actually says UX, but it still hadn't become popular as an acronym yet. But the big thing is that for every dollar you invested, you could get anywhere from $100 to $250 in return. So when that happened, the corporations, you start to see this big shift, and the corporations are getting involved. And that's when the waters began to get a little muddy. And I'll explain that in a bit, because a lot of companies started getting involved with UX related, what we now know as UX related disciplines, but they didn't necessarily have strong UX maturity levels. They weren't necessarily learning about UX and how to manage this new thing that a lot of companies were getting into. Move to the bottom of the screen where you see people like waiting for interviews. That little illustration is really what it's meant to convey. And I'm actually going to stop with this illustration at that point. That was just shortly thereafter, around 2005 to 2010. You start to see all of these articles being published talking about how UX was the next big up and coming thing. And this is the career you got to go after. And the salary survey results are getting out there, and people realize how much money you can make during UX. And so that's when we get into start to enter the phase of what we start to call the wild, wild west, in that people are flocking to it, but companies aren't really educating themselves about UX. A lot of people are getting involved. They don't really know what to do. There weren't a lot of programs at universities, and even if there was, a lot of people weren't willing to pay that money. It was starting to get pretty crazy, and there are a lot of positions, and there weren't enough people to fill them. And when you take all that and stir it up into a pot of soup, things are about to get really, really interesting. Now, let's take another step back. In the early days of UX, I'll just start saying it that way. In the early days of UX, when many of us were coming along, I was coming along in 95. The Polar Bear book, as you see here, was first published in 98. I wanted to learn more. I was getting curious, like a lot of people do today. And one of the things I love about the early days is that if you wanted to learn about UX, even if you didn't go to school for it, which you couldn't, but not too much anyway, very, very few programs by that time, or around that time between 98 and 2003, not very many at all. But during those early days, you could almost pick up practically any book on the market. And these are 5 of my favorites that I tapped into early in my career that were just fantastic books that really helped, especially homepage usability changed my life. So did defensive design for the web. These books really helped to shape the way that I thought. They helped me to approach design and design problems in a very constructive and practical manner. Really, really helpful. But the key point I want to stress here, we weren't dealing with misinformation. So you got the books. Anybody remember webpages@suck.com? Anybody been around long enough to remember that? We would, if it wasn't books, you would go to websites. And this was one of the most popular sites of the day where we learned how to do good design by studying bad design. One of the things that you did. Another popular website, I know some people will remember this, Jacob Nielsen's old useit.com. Not much to look at, but the content, same thing for web pages that suck. Not much to look at, but the content was just fantastic. And you could spend hours going through these sites and digesting the information that was being presented. Another oldie but goodie, and yes, it is still out there today, Boxes and Arrows. This was one of the places you would go. I mean, look at some of the content here. Understanding organizational stakeholders for design success. Still valuable today. Making guidelines part of the team. Remote contextual inquiry. That's really big now, as much as you can do that in the pandemic. Observing the user experience, which I believe was actually a book that they're talking about here. I know there's a book by that name. Card sorting, a definitive guide. Information architecture, which you hardly even hear about today. We could go to any of these sites and literally spend hours just digesting information, and then you really couldn't finish, and you would just spend days just going through this content and digesting it. And this is how a lot of us were built up in those early days. Now, let's get into the DeLorean, if you will. And let's take a look. We're going to go back to 2011. Or just go to 2011, I should say. And remember what I mentioned, that bottom illustration? That's about the time that stuff started happening. In 2011, we've got all these positions, nobody to fill them. People recognize there's a boom, and it's actually creating a problem. You've got a labor shortage in this new field that folks know is valuable, but what are we going to do on the employer side, on the employee side, the job seeker side? People are trying to become qualified and they don't know what to do. And so that's when things started to go haywire. This is when misinformation reared its ugly head in the world of UX. People were hearing of UX's potential. The word was that it was easy to succeed. People began flocking to sources, just like back with the gold rush. There's a direct parallel. Low to no UX maturity level. That became problematic. And I've been saying this since 2012, and folks didn't listen to me when I said it. And now here we are. But there was a siege. UX became under siege, and people started shifting what UX really was. I've got a few more of these keynotes to share, though. About that same time, non-experts began sharing their thoughts. Nobody to stop them, nobody willing to stop them. And so it started happening quite a bit. UX techniques started to get rebranded. Things that were done in 2002, 2005, 2010, they started rebranding things that existed before, giving them new names. And a lot of people that were coming along that were new had no idea, seemed interesting, seemed good to me, so they would just jump on board. Non-UXers between 2011, 2015, non-UXers, because they needed somebody in charge, started leading UX teams. Many were transitioning into UX through fabrication. In other words, people were willing to lie to get a position in UX. They were willing to fudge things on their resume to give themselves more credit than what they deserve, to say things that just weren't true, put keywords, sprinkle keywords on the resume, just trying to get the interview. It became common. And then lastly, on this page, excuse me, people were warring against the standards, the things that a lot of us learned when we were looking at those books and those old resources. People started warring against those things. There was nothing wrong with them. The principles were still good, but people were starting to sort of turn a blinded eye to those things and devalue them. Now the discipline is going through a transformation. It's a big misinformation piece. Seniors began to be labeled as gatekeepers. Won't get into that today, but got to watch out for that one because it's usually used the incorrect way. Gatekeeping is about advocating for quality. It's not about keeping anybody out of anything. UX history started to fade into obscurity. People didn't, the average person coming into UX was not learning about UX history. So there was nothing to respect, nothing to embrace, nothing to serve as a point of reference. UX specialization started becoming commonplace. Where back in the day, say 2005 to 2010, a UX designer, a UX architect would do everything. The research, the strategy, the wireframes, the prototypes, the interfaces, and we would do everything. And so now, going forward, the specialization started to come into play to the extent that some people will interview a person. Somebody's not muted there. They'll interview somebody who is say an OG, if you will, and think that the person doesn't have any experience with a certain part of UX simply because of their title, not knowing that back in the day, if you were an architect, you did do everything. So one of the things that people didn't expect when those changes came about. And then lastly, new irrelevant positions in UX started to arise and now are pretty much accepted. So misinformation, that's the new norm, folks. We are living in an arena today when it comes to UX that when you tap into different sources, you need to have your antenna up, so to speak. You need to be on guard. You need to be alert, because just because something is presented doesn't mean that it's worth partaking of. Just because something is being shared or even embraced by the masses, you see something on LinkedIn, it has 3,000 likes. That doesn't mean that it's viable. Critical thinking, which is a key part of UX as a whole, has gone out of the window. And again, misinformation is now the order of the day. And speaking of sources, LinkedIn, Instagram, Medium, I included Fast Company because they tend to produce articles about UX. So does Forbes. And those articles, a lot of times, the vast majority of the time, are not written by UX professionals. So if you're not careful, you'll listen to it because Fast Company or Forbes published it. But we need to consider, who is it that's saying it? And are they really an expert in the field that they're talking about, or are they just talking? It's something that people don't consider. LinkedIn Learning, as I'll talk about a couple of these. LinkedIn Learning has UX courses. Some of them are not taught by UX professionals. at all. Matter of fact, there was one course that was taught by someone who actually hates UX and feels that it's a waste of time and tells people that when they're taking the course. Go figure. Facebook, Reddit, Pinterest, YouTube, Vimeo, Clubhouse. Rest in peace, Clubhouse, soon to come, probably. But got to pick with Clubhouse. Not a fan. But you go to the source, and there's something I call baby bird syndrome, where, especially if you're new to UX, you're hungry, you want to take in something to help you grow, and there is a sense of an assumption that it's safe to partake of things, and that's why it's important to have a mentor, because sometimes you just don't know. These are just venues, but have venue, will travel is not really the order of the day. A source is just a source. That's all it is. So all these things said, how do we navigate? How is it that even somebody who's been in the field as long as myself, and there's some other folks I know that are on the call that have been involved in UX for quite some time, we still have to be careful, because the information that crosses our desk is not always legit. And if we're not paying attention, then issues can easily arise. And then we become carriers of the misinformation. And we don't want to do that, because that will detrimentally impact the discipline and create problems for us from a career standpoint, the value that leaders put on the work that we do, things of that nature. So we need to be careful about these things. So again, how do we navigate? 7 factors. I'm going to share 7 factors, 7 ways, 7 things that we can do that help ensure that we can overcome misinformation in UX. Number 1, we must make sure that we properly define UX. Talking about misinformation and some of the little chat that we had before we got started today, you think about things where people will say something on the line of UX is a mindset. Is it? Is it really? There'll be more on that later, but UX is much, 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 much more than a mindset. But there are people out there who say that it is. When we don't properly define UX, anybody who doesn't properly define UX is wide open for any misinformation to take root and grow. And then that becomes problematic, not only for that individual, but everybody that they share the misinformation with. Number 2, we must commit to lifelong learning. We talked about this a little bit earlier today too. I believe Melanie was the one that brought that up, that when you're in UX, when you opt into being a UX professional, one person said that they just got their first UX gig. Congratulations. That's awesome. Hopefully you're in it for the long haul. But there's never a point of arriving. We're never done. UX is a commitment to lifelong learning. We always learn, we always grow, we always expand, we're always tweaking. And so when we keep our learner's hat on, and we have that academic side of our brain, so to speak, and we keep feeding it, it's something that will help to keep us sharp. And help us to understand when we come in contact with misinformation, so that we can sort of keep our mind protected against things like that. Because some misinformation is cute, but that's all it is. It's cute. Develop a strong filter. And ironically, defining UX and committing to lifelong learning, both of these things are key aspects of developing a strong filter. We want to be able to identify something if it's not beneficial, if it's not accurate, if something is worthy of additional scrutiny. We want to be able to identify that. Even if something is good, it doesn't hurt to subject it to an acid test, so to speak, so that you can identify, so you can validate just how beneficial, how practical, and how sound that thing is that we're embracing. So we want to make sure we have a good, strong filter. If you have no filter, everything is getting through, and that's going to be a problem. You will accept anybody and everybody, and everything is good. And there's a phrase for that. It's called being a Pollyanna. If you're finding the good in everything, it's a matter of time before misinformation sort of ends up being the order of the day for you. and you don't want to be there. Also, in conjunction with that, we want to make sure that we're embracing critical thinking. Some people will call that being judgy, which is frankly a hypocritical mindset because we judge everything all the time. We want to evaluate. We want to analyze. We want to scrutinize. And when we do these things, and when we have properly defined things, and when we are learning, and when we have a good filter, we want to make sure that only quality stuff is what we're embracing and what we're putting our time and energy and effort into. So critical thinking is not a bad thing, even though some people don't like it, and it seems to have gone by the wayside. Sometimes you think it's extinct. I mean, common sense isn't common. So when we engage in critical thinking, we're doing ourselves a solid, and we're doing the discipline a solid as well. Number 5, make sure you subscribe to EQ, or emotional intelligence. It's one thing to be smart, but it's also important to make sure that we're sharp in the way that we're handling not only our smarts, but also the way that we're handling our emotions, the way that we're handling the way we're self-aware, making sure that we know how to own up to what we need to own up to make sure to be honest, to be professional, to be courteous, to be considerate, to be empathetic. All of those things that really are at the core of what it means to be a UX professional. So make sure you subscribe to emotional intelligence. Can't really thrive in UX without it, truth be told. Number 6, beware of hero worship. I told you this was coming, that I would talk about it indirectly. We all have at some point in time in our career, I'm sure, and if not in our career, we've done it somewhere in our lives, where all you need to do is hear somebody's name and you're pretty much there. You're all over it. I'm not going to throw any names out there. I am known for busting bubbles. I'm not going to bust bubbles on this one. I'll let you decide who those people are for you, for each one of you individually. But we cannot be caught up in the fact that just because such a person says something, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's true. And even some of the biggest names in UX sometimes have said things that make you stop and have a Scooby-Doo moment. I think everybody knows what that, we don't, those things happen. It's more important to be a critical thinker and have a strong filter than to just accept something that someone says because of who they are and because of who we thought they were when it came to UX. So beware of hero worship. And the last one on this list, perform background checks. There are people, Medium, I mentioned that play. Medium, I call, some of you know me, I call Medium a cesspool. You really have to vet out what it is that you're looking at on Medium, and some of the conversations on Reddit, a really dangerous place, but more so Medium with regard to number 7 here. Before you embrace something akin to hero worship, don't just accept it because it's been published. There's no managing editors on Medium. All you have to do, you can type 1, 2, 3 and then publish it, and it's out there. There's nobody to stop anybody from publishing something that's inaccurate on Medium. Do yourself a favor, and when you see somebody that's posted something on Medium, go and look them up on LinkedIn. When you see somebody posting a video telling you you can get a job in UX with no experience. There was one video, a person talked about how to get a manager's job in UX with no experience. I mean, really? Do you really want to work for that person? That company's going to feel it later, that's for sure. But before you get all gung-ho about what it is you're about to partake of, go look them up. Look up the person on LinkedIn. Look at their background. How much experience do they really have? Who have they worked for? What types of work have they done? Are you going to see everything? Can you get everything from doing that? No, but it's better than nothing. And a lot of times people just take what somebody says and they run off with it. And it really comes in handy when you see something on the line of these articles. There was an article written in 2016 that said that UX, the discipline of UX, was about to go away. There's been several of these articles. But if you go to look at the authors, a lot of times, they're not UX people. They're just somebody with an opinion. You can have your opinion, that's fine. But just like you're entitled to your opinion, I'm entitled to validate whether or not I need to be listening to you. So that's something that we need to do, and we'll be better off for it. And the people who are depending on us, if you're a mentor or an instructor or something like that, you're a leader, then we need to be sharper than that so that we're not embracing things like that, helping everybody out. So bottom line, folks, is it noisy out there? Absolutely. No question. It's definitely noisy. There's a lot of static out here in the world of UX, but truth is available. 3 quick, rudimentary, basic examples that I want to share with you. Number 1, and I'm asking this question rhetorically, how many of you have been talking to stakeholders or maybe even other UX people, and people use the terms wireframes and mock-up interchangeably? That's a bit of a problem, isn't it? That's a bit of a problem. Wireframes, because the truth is the base. When we properly define things, it will help sort of garrison us against misinformation. A wireframe is a low fidelity representation of a design used to inform people about design direction and obtain buy-in. It's a communication vehicle. It illustrates the design, but it's low fidelity. It's possible to have a medium frame fidelity, and usually in mobile, you'll see a higher fidelity, but it's still a representation. It's not the design. And it certainly is not a mock-up. But if you don't watch it, you'll be going back and forth with your terminology there too. And now you're going to have trouble communicating because people are using terms the wrong way. UX research. We talked earlier about people putting two images up on LinkedIn. Which one do you like better? I'm doing research. They literally say this. Which one do you like better, A or B? And that's not research. UX research involves multiple methods of evaluation and inquiry used to obtain data that informs and or validates design direction and sheds light on users' mental models. And by the way, an A/B test is only one of 125 related factors associated with UX research. So, and it's interesting when people like to think that one thing is research, and then in so doing, they just threw triangulation out the window, which calls for another method to help validate the results that you got out of the method that you used first. So it's never just about one thing. So anyway. Number 3, this one will probably ruffle some feathers, but that's what we do. Lean UX. It's not a book. Lean UX, the term lean, and then there's the acronym UX. Lean, I could have just taken UX off of this, and what I wrote after is still the same. Lean is about eliminating waste from the design process. So when we bring UX in it, that's where the second part of the statement comes into play. So sometimes you have to move fast. Sometimes we have to move faster than we would like to. So that means that we have to streamline what we're doing, and we can't follow certain processes to the T. And when you're doing that, you're trying to find a faster way to get from point A to point B. You're simply going to be lean in your approach. Now, we just explained that to you in all of 15 seconds. No book needed. But when it gets blown out of proportion, misinformation is going to ensue. It's impossible for it not to. So just 3 quick examples. So a little addendum as we begin to wrap up. Did you know that pyrite, we talked about the fool's gold earlier. We mentioned that it includes traces of pure gold. Now, what does that have to do with what we're talking to you about today? When we're dealing with and trying to overcome misinformation, which I'm sure everybody wants to do, or you wouldn't be here, we need to understand that one of the reasons that misinformation has the wings that it does, so to speak, is because a lot of misinformation actually has traces of pure UX. And so a lot of times people will hear that trace of pure UX that's part of a of a presentation that is full of misinformation, or it has misinformation woven in, people will give credit to the presenter because there are traces of truth, traces of things that are trustworthy and reliable, and then forget that, okay, yeah, there's traces of gold in that piece of pyrite, but there's very, very few. And there's a lot of things in that pyrite that have no value whatsoever. And so when we embrace critical thinking the way that we should, yeah, we'll recognize the thing that's there that has value, but we'll also be ready to throw the rest of it out and to not give it too much value, too much credence, too much authorization, if you will, because in so doing, without letting people know, or without you yourself, without me, myself, responding to misinformation in a way that's reflective of the content that's been presented to you, that's how we get better, folks. That's how we help other people to get sharper, because we're not embracing the fool's gold. You extract the gold from it and you go forward. But it's time for us, it's past due time for us to stand against misinformation. It's pretty rampant. As said, it's the order of the day. It's the way that we live today. We are surrounded by misinformation, and we got to take a stand against it and begin embracing and sharing and giving more visible credence to the things that do help us to stand and represent UX with the integrity and the value that we should. So that's the talk, folks. Thank you. Where you can find me, the World of UX with Darren Hood podcast is everywhere. I'm on Twitter under Darren Hood and under UX Uncensored. Most folks connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm on Instagram under UX Uncensored and the World of UX podcast. Oh man, I'm everywhere. I got a YouTube channel. I write on Medium now. I got a new comic strip that's out there, and I'm going to share the link. We meet the last Thursday of every month. We meet with UXers from around the world in what we call the UX Chit Chat Hour. It's going to be 2 days from now. Feel free to come out and just talk with folks from around the world about whatever comes up. It's nice to talk. It is therapeutic to talk to other UXers. It's informative. It's enlightening. It's enriching, and it's fun. So I'll share the link here momentarily, and you can come and register and come and join us out there. We'll be on AirMeet in 2 days at 12:15 Eastern time. So thank you again, folks from UX Akron, and I will relinquish control of the screen and turn it back over to you, Melanie.